Welcome to Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering from ELD's Time Vault Games. Here we have Rodney on Dragon versus John on a lands build. All sorts of success with depths decks, both Naya depths and lower lands. It's going to be a tough matchup. I'd say probably significantly harder than the Naya depths decks, as you don't have access to the Elvish Reclaimers. You don't have nearly as much access to Bajuka Bog. Slower, grindier deck, and even before the intro is done, Rodney's already got a Gristlebrand in play. Thanks to Reanimate, he Cabal Therapied himself, put that into the bin, using a Lotus Petal to get back the Gristlebrand. John has Mox Diamond into a Pithing Needle, which will at least stop Gristlebrand from drawing more cards. Very explosive opening. Petal into Reanimate. A Piranha Marsh. A much slower card, combos with Worldgorger Dragon, however. And that's a wrap. So Dark Ritual into bringing back the Worldgorger. For those unfamiliar, Worldgorger Dragon enters the battlefield. You exile all your other permanents. Leaves the battlefield, you bring them all back. So every time that happens, the Animate Dead falls off. Back to the graveyard, the whole loop happens. Worldgorger dancing in and out of the graveyard, each time Piranha Marsh entering tapped. However, they do lose a point of life. That is why that card is in there. Otherwise, your lands are just going to tap for mana each time, giving you access to infinite mana. Piranha Marsh upgrades that to infinite damage at the cost of coming into play tapped. So that's really the main difference between Dragon and other Reanimator decks, is it does run a pretty trash land in Piranha Marsh. I mean, it is egregious to have a land coming into play tapped in a combo deck that's trying to win on the first turn. But sometimes you actually get there even with that land. Just Lotus Petal, Dark Ritual, and make your Piranha Marsh land drop and just blow your opponent out of the water. So it's certainly a trade-off. Nobody's disputing that. It's a question of whether or not it's actually stronger, and not needing to pass the turn is really a big deal with Reanimator. That is a major problem for these type of lists. When you have to pass the turn, you are potentially going to die. You don't have any interaction on the stack. You can have creature removal pretty easily in the form of Snuff Out if you have life available, but overall, you really don't want to be passing the turn. It is not safe. Even if you've shredded your opponent's hand, there's a chance that they have top decks that could win for them, and that's what Dragon is built around avoiding, is passing the turn, getting blown out. John's definitely going to need a hand with some interaction, so we'll skip over his mulliganing. Both players mulling to 6. A play this time. God and Port. Do a Sphere of Resistance. So Mox Diamond allowing for a real roadblock to be thrown up. Piranha Marsh's drawback not as severe when you weren't going to be casting anything anyways. And paying 1 to unmask, going after John's hand. He's just Life from the Loam left. So Force of Vigor actually would have been relevant. This Rishadan Port could be at its strongest in this type of game, keeping Rodney to just 1 mana while everything costs at least 1 to cast. This land drop Rodney makes things a little bit more inconvenient for John. He really does want to shut him off completely, and Thespian Stage can help with that too, becoming a copy of Rishadan Port. That Force of Vigor could have been useful, blowing up Animate Dead and Dance of the Dead. Another liability of Dragon is that it runs so many Animate Dead effects compared to Exhume and Reanimate. Really, the exchanging of the playset of Exhume or playset of Dance of the Deads. And a Dark Ritual into an Animate. So yeah, that Force of Vigor would have been extremely strong right here. Would have stopped Gristlebrand from entering. Animate Dead does have a triggered ability when it enters the battlefield. It enchants a creature card in a graveyard. And when it enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, you return the creature to the battlefield. So it's a mouthful, but it's got an intervening if, meaning that if you blow up the Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead in response to the trigger, then that creature is not actually going to arrive. They're not going to be able to draw 7, or it goes back to the graveyard or anything like that. It just straight up stays in the bin, just totally useless. And instead, John is just in a horrible spot here. He was very close to being in good shape. That Dark Ritual just pushed things way out of range. Totally out of control. Urza's Saga, 1 turn away from ticking down too. Could have found some graveyard hate. That's a really disappointing situation that John finds himself in. He had the tools that he needed. Rodney's deck just a little bit too explosive. Urza's Saga on board, that would go away. However, it could be copied by a Thespian stage, which would have created some very interesting gameplay. The land itself, the card itself, is actually gaining the abilities. So once you have that construct ability, when you change to a different card name and you're no longer in Urza's Saga, you're not actually going to have to tick up and lose the land. So you can actually just have a Thespian stage that is a copy of, say, Rishadan Port that already gained the ability to pay 2 and tap to create a construct token, allowing you to spit out a construct every turn, potentially. In this situation, John would probably want to be bottlenecking Rodney's mana, but man, that mana base really proved to be pretty resilient. 3 swamps. Even if things hadn't gotten out of hand there, Rodney would have been right on the edge of being able to cast a lethal spell anyways, even with a couple of Rishadan ports. We've really needed to turn all of these Thespian stages into ports and also have enough mana, basically having double Rodney's mana to keep him shut down. This just did not line up well for John here. Soul Guide Lantern arrives off of Urza's Saga. I do not believe that'll be enough in this situation at all. Rodney does win the battle of attrition here. Oh, he's down to 1. Well, that's interesting. Those life totals apparently weren't correct, so that's interesting. Let's see here. So Gristlebrand would swing for 8. And oh, that's an interesting interaction. So John using Rishadan Port during Rodney's upkeep. However, there was also a trigger for untapping Gristlebrand. So if Rodney just passes there and John passes, at that point, the Gristlebrand doesn't untap. So I actually, if I was playing that, my opponent ends up with 3 tapped lands or a tapped Gristlebrand. Potentially instructive. So we have a Stitcher Supplier and a reanimated Stitcher Supplier getting some blockers in the way. Two bodies. Rodney needed every last bit of mana here to pull this off. Yeah, this is a really close one, potentially decided by that very niche rules interaction. Just as a general rule of thumb, you want to port after your opponent has paid all of their upkeep costs. So Stitcher Suppliers step in the way valiantly of these construct tokens, which would have been certain death. Instead, Bristleband's going to be able to crash in and gain 8 life, drawing potentially 14 cards. So I don't know what use that will be with this Soul Guide Lantern out. Let's see how these players finish this game out. Bojuka Bog getting rid of the graveyard. Now, if John doesn't have an answer to the Gristlebrand, it may just be 8 in the air and then another 8 in the air. Swings down to 2. Again, if John had the ability to create those constructs repeatedly, that would be a really interesting game state. Little mana intensive. Reasonably costed. I mean, paying essentially 3 mana for exponentially growing creatures. You know, you have 2 5/5s, and another one comes in. Now you got 3 6/6s, 4 7/7s. The fact that they grow all your other constructs and themselves means that things can get out of hand extremely fast. Grief. I guess surprisingly fast. It's not that fast. You're doing like 1 per turn, but over the course of, say, 6 turns, it ends up being way more damage than people would calculate just guessing in their head. All right. Got all sorts of damage to contend with here. Life from the Loam. Soul Guide Lantern cashed in. Handshake. And that is a wrap. Not able to stabilize versus the evasion of Grief and Gristlebrand as Dragon takes it down. Thank you for watching. For more magic from ELD's Time Vault games, be sure to subscribe and check out more videos just for you over here.